I would like to introduce Dr. Bill Toffler, who is a lifelong friend for life. Dr. Toffler started Physicians for Compassionate Care as a result of the 1994 first Oregon vote to legalize assisted suicide. And he's a strong advocate for life at both ends of life, the unborn child and those that are threatened by assisted suicide. And Liberty Pike is now our official speaker to youth mainly. She speaks when anyone asks her to talk to high school, college kids, she's a fabulous. Or adults, yeah, she does talk to adults too. And she is Oregon Right to Life's college liaison that works with colleges, campuses, and with high school groups too. And you will soon find out as we do this that she's a bundle of fabulous energy, and that's why she's really great with the kids. So this is a very informal session, and they say, you say. So what we like to know is what you might have questions on. How do we answer this? How do we answer that? What do we say when somebody says this? And we are kind of experts. And hopefully we'll have some helpful hints for you of how to answer some puzzling questions or some puzzling issues that you are dealing with. So with that being said, the first thing to do is to open up for questions. It's your turn. For the tape, the question was, 20 years after abortion was legalized, the crime rate dropped, I will say, supposedly. What do we say to that? And the other question was?
The population.
Overpopulation. Okay, Liberty is dying to say something.
Okay.
Can you hear me? I'll take my shoes off. Now I'm Gail's height. All right. Ooh. All right, so I just did a debate, you guys, where I heard those exact two things. That's why I was so excited. And I will have you know that actually for the first question, the pro-abortion gal who's defending it, she answered it. And she said that that isn't a scientific question to ask because it's correlation without causation. You don't really know what caused it, and there's so many other things that could possibly affect the crime rate, you know, the economy, the president, the people, the schools, all these different things. So it's just too big of a stretch to compare something without evidence for it. And then as to the population myth, there's so many, what you can do first is say that there are so many scientists that question the science of the overpopulation myth. And I know that Gail probably has all sorts of good things to say about it too, but there's also really, really good videos that people can watch just for some information. But that is a myth, and it's something that it's a political statement that people like to say, that it's overpopulation, that we need to get rid of people. And if you're going to say, then let's get rid of the unborn, then what you can say then is say, well, then why don't we kill off old people or kill off handicapped people, because they are eating up even more resources than an unborn child. So it's a very slippery slope. Do you have something you want to say too?
Yeah, I do.
I can tell. We're all like, yes, let's do it.
Your enthusiasm's infectious. So I'm infected now. So, but Liberty is absolutely right. And if you want to look at some of these really effective little short videos, they're the populationresearchinstitute.org, or just Google Population Research Institute. Stephen Mosher and young people like Liberty have put together an amazing little 2-minute clips with stick figures and absolute facts, factoids. And so much so that yesterday I was helping somebody move into her new Habitat for Humanity, and her son has a somewhat liberal, I would say, quote liberal, because a true liberal mind is open-minded to different ideas. But he had the courage to present his professor with some of these little YouTube video kind of things that Population Research has produced. And the response from this person who actually did have some openness said, I'd never heard that. Now, just to give you, I was on the radio just 2 weeks ago on this population question with one of the Christian ministers who has an internet kind of blog radio, blog/radio, and he had me on for, I think we were on for almost the full hour. And we devoted the whole show to population myths. And the factoids in getting prepared for that, not only did I watch some of those clips again to refresh my memory about the different things, but in the new research I did that I didn't understand was Guess what Putin, the president, the recently re-elected, having served whatever terms in front and behind the Russian people, what did he do just 3 or 4 years ago? He's paying Russian women to have babies to the tune of $9,000 a year for the entire lifespan of their kids, not just a bonus one time, which is about the average Russian salary. Why is he doing it? Because Russia, this vast country that used to cover 9 time zones, I don't know if it still does with all the satellites that have kind of flown off, has only 140 million people. And if they don't change the trajectory they're on, by the year 2050, they're going to have only 100 million. They'll be less than the island nation of Japan, which, by the way, is also paying women to have babies. Not from some theological point of view, not from a pro-life point of view, but because they're in demographic winter. You heard already from Reggie this morning about how this demographic shift is going to cause a bubble to pop. Well, it's true in Russia. It's true in Europe. Italy's down to 56 million when we were there from 60. They're literally involuting as the pyramid base drops. So it's a critical issue. The first part of that question was intriguing too. It was the crime. There actually was a published study that actually purported that if we just, abortion has actually decreased, criminality. On the other hand, what they tend to ignore, again, not proving causation, from just because correlation is there doesn't mean it's causation. But the problem right now is that, and I mentioned this, we have fatherless children in general. We have 43% of our newborns are born to usually heroic women who've been abandoned by their so-called lovers. And 80% of the males in prison right now come from fatherless homes. So if you want to talk about prisons, which by the way are burgeoning in this country, I mean the data that says we've decreased crime rates is flying in the face of the reality of the prisons that are overflowing, and they're having to reduce the mandatory penalties because they literally have no space. California and other places are passing laws like that. So I'd question the premise to start with, and then I think Liberty made an excellent point that there's lots of things that may be true, but they're not at all really cause and effect and related, and that's the bottom line. So.
Well, and then also what they don't want to talk about too is that child abuse has really gone up too since abortion was legalized, and I think we're on a lot firmer ground to compare the abortion to child abuse because of women, how they feel like bad mothers and horrible people because they allowed their child to be killed. So then they have problems connecting to future children because of that.
Again, we can't say it for cause and effect.
Right, exactly. But I mean, we're on a little bit firmer ground than saying there's a crime rate trend or crime decreasing because we've killed all these people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Oh, yes, Susie.
I had someone say that to me.
Very good argument. And for the tape, the guest said that she had the same question asked to her, and she said, well, yes, if you're going to say we've killed criminals, then also we have killed inventors and scientists and doctors and good people too. So that was acknowledged. Yes.
In fact, one of the greatest stories, I think, along those lines of how things have changed, Steve Jobs was born before '73, and his mother had a crisis pregnancy, so to speak, in the language of the old pregnancy resource centers that we've abandoned because it isn't a real crisis, is it? It's a change in what your plans were. Unfortunately, the mother of Steve Jobs didn't have the option and didn't opt for the option of ending the life of her unborn baby who would become Steve Jobs. But she did adopt him out. And she wanted a child to go to college-educated parents. And the college-educated parents that she had in mind that was going to be the match were actually, as they found out at the end that he was a male and they wanted a girl, they backed out. So here she's stuck with a baby coming and no parents. So the adoption agency immediately turned to another loving couple who were glad to have a girl, boy, whatever. And the long and the short of it is that she found out they didn't have college education. So that was not going to be a go, and ultimately with negotiations or time or both, she relented, and Steve Jobs' adoptive parents indeed didn't have a college education but promised to give him one, which he then got for 1 year where? It was right here in Portland, and for 1 year. But he went on, and you think about this one person who didn't end up aborting her child, which is the point you made, and I have Steve Jobs in my pocket. I have more firepower in my pocket with an old iPod Touch than we had on the entire University of Notre Dame campus when I was an aerospace engineer. We had 3 computers, and they couldn't do what this little thing in my pocket can do. And all of that genius, that ease of use, came about because he wasn't one of the 54 million since 73. Couldn't make the point any stronger. And how can people escape that fact is the point. It's a tremendous point you made.
Yeah, the overcrowded, changing the word to overcrowding, yes. And that's because it's one in one city. If they open up the countryside, I don't think they'd have the overcrowding problem.
So you could do the whole seminar on this, and Stephen Mosher, who's the head of the Population Research Institute, who I would have hoped to have been mentioned this morning in Reggie's session, because he actually was the one who went under President Nixon, who opened the door to China, and we sent 50 people to China. They sent 1,000 here, real fair as kind of trade exchange. He was the last one chosen because he spoke Chinese, and that's how he broke away and unmasked the one-child forced abortion, and he told his story. He came back and he shared the story with his anthropology, atheist, agnostic anthropologists at Stanford, and they really weren't interested in his plight. And fortunately, some pro-life people, including Father Marks at Human Life International, and this story has now leaked out. But think about all the data that supports that actually having a lot of people is good. Why is Japan paying people to have babies? What natural resources is Japan, the island nation about the size of California, about the same size, but it has almost 3.5 times more people than California. So why do they want more people? Why do they want to overcrowd the island, use up all the natural resources? Because the economic miracle of Japan that was devastated after World War II just 60 years ago is the people. They have no coal and oil. They have no trees. It's the people. And they were the number 2 before which country overtook them and knocked them into 3rd place? China. And now China, historically, we used to send wheat to China and Russia from our Midwest, our breadbasket, the United States. Why were we doing that? Because it was even more communist before than it is now, and Beijing couldn't make good decisions any more than Moscow could. And so now when you freed the people to be a little more creative, you've got some billionaires now in China and Russia, they are actually outproducing the rest of the world. And in fact, the economic miracle not only of China, but what other major country that was mentioned this morning? That's India. So much so the economists talk about Chindia. And literally, these 2 countries, it's hard to find something, including the thing I just pulled out of my wallet, or my pocket, that's not made in China. Exactly. So the myth, and you heard the message about the United States is gone and wants to get population control. That's not a new idea. It went back to the 60s when part of our foreign trade was to literally limit the population of these African countries. Not because we cared about overpopulation so much, because if you allowed the countries to grow with population, that is a strength. And you could use the natural resources if you kept the limits on the population. So it's a diabolical message. What does the People's Republic of Portland want to do? They want us all to live on top of each other, which we choose to do, by the way. I used to live in Sweet Home, a town of 7,000. Why do you move to a place like this? Well, I couldn't do a job at the university in Sweet Home. And I can't go to the opera, and I can't. So we choose to live on top of ourselves. And what's happening to the rest of the country? It's getting empty. So, if you have an open-minded person, this is a whole bunch. How do you respond? If you can say, would you like to hear some facts? And this happened to me on my practice recently. I had a 3rd-year medical student. We got into this kind of thing. And the more we talked, the more animated we got. But he'd never heard these points of view. Just like the professor that my friend who's moving into the home, her son had the courage, just like hopefully all do, to go learn about the real truth about population and how it's actually a gift, and that the rest of the world, the so-called flyover place is getting empty. I mean, the ultimate factoid, if you take the entire 7 billion people of the world, they can fit in the state of Texas. Everybody would have over 1,000 square feet. Now, I'm not talking about the mountains and the lakes. I'm talking about the landmass. The rest of this country would be empty. Everybody would be there. Canada, Central America, South America, Africa, Asia, everything would be empty except for the state of Texas. Think of that. Now, you can do the math. I've challenged anybody. I've done it myself. You can go look at the land mass of inhabitable Texas, and you can take the entire 7 billion of us and put them in the state of Texas. That's how big the world is, and yet you constantly hear this mantra of overpopulation. It started back, unfortunately, by Minister Malthus in the 19th century, who thought we were all like fruit flies, and that we would just overpopulate and eat up all of our food supply, like we're no smarter than fruit flies. And that's the mythology of population. So it's too much said, but it's very much, hopefully, food for thought.
I would like to actually ask Dr. Toffler a question, switching to the other end of life, which he is also an expert in. We here at Oregon Right to Life meet, when especially candidates or people in general, that are very, very pro-life on the abortion issue. They hate abortion, it's wrong, you're killing an innocent human being. However, when it comes to assisted suicide, they are fine with that because, and their argument is, well, when you're talking about a baby, innocent baby, he doesn't have any choice in the matter, and you're killing him. However, assisted suicide, you have a full-grown adult making a decision on his very own, and so it's okay.
Sure. You know, it is a very seductive argument because it sounds like, I'm in favor of choice. It's just the point I'm making some bad choices. And I try to personalize it when I hear a message like that. And I think about my mother as she was at the end of her life. She often thought, I'm old. She was 89 at the year she died. And she's 7 years older than my dad. My dad was sick. He died. And she would, especially in the last year of her life, talk about, why doesn't God take me? I might as well be dead. And how we respond to one another when those messages come out has everything to do with what subsequent message comes from that individual articulating the I want to be dead. So when my mother would sometimes say, and she'd be wincing in pain, and she'd say, I just might as well be dead. And I said, well, Mom, what's the matter? What's going on? And she said, well, my hip hurts. And I said, well, Mom, did you take your pain medicine? And she said, well, yes. And I said, well, when? Yesterday. And so, well, Mom, let me get you some pain medicine. I would give her the stepwise approach to pain that we normally would do, and it'd start with 2 extra strength Tylenol. Gave her the 2 extra strength Tylenol. We could go on up to oxycodone, and you can move the oxycodone up to how many of you want. In her case, she was not a very big person, and half of an oxycodone was the furthest I can ever remember getting with her. So with the 2 Tylenol, 20 minutes later, she says, my hip doesn't hurt anymore. I can't believe it. And, and a whole different outlook. So one of the things that, when people say I might as well be dead, maybe what they're saying, I feel useless. Maybe they're saying, what's the point? Nobody cares about me. Maybe they're saying, I can't go on living. Maybe they are in pain. Maybe they're lonely. Maybe they're afraid. So the first thing is not to collude with that message. And the collusion, what would be collusion? My mother says, well, I might as well be dead. Well, Mom, you've said that about 6 times. It sounds like you're pretty serious about it. Do you want me to help you go to a doctor to get an overdose? That's the Oregon way. I mean, we're honoring choice. But what message does it say to my mother? And it's not just true. You say, well, that's fine for you, Dr. Toffler. You come from a religious home, and your mother was Catholic, and my word, that's fine for you. But what about, I'm not religious. I don't believe there's any specialness about life. And I remember being on call at the hospital, and a Hemlock board member had been admitted with some atrial arrhythmia, and we'd gotten her straightened out. She was stable, and I was the attending today, so I always like to come in and meet people in case they go south during the night. I've already met them and their families and all. So I come in and I develop rapport. She says to me, I know who you are when I introduce myself, and I smile. And she says, well, with this, childish or devilish, I don't know what kind of smile she had on her face, but I know who you are, and we don't agree about end-of-life issues. So I finished taking the history, the physical. We'd actually developed some rapport and bonding by that point in time. If somebody comes in the room and says, oh, we got to get a different doctor, because she also realizes I come from a 180 poll from this Hemlock board member about end-of-life issues. But her daughter's standing at the end of the bed. And at some point, the woman says, I'm fine with him, meaning me. And so I said, well, if you don't need a new doctor, I'm fine with taking care of you. To me, the idea we have political different views, that's, if I If I didn't see people that had different political views, I wouldn't have a practice. So we continued, and so we had no more medical issues to talk about. I asked the daughter how she felt about her mother's wish to end her life at some point with an overdose. And the daughter says, well, that's totally her choice. And I said, well, I understand that. You're saying you respect your mother's belief and whatever she wants to do, but I wanted to know how you felt about it. And it took about 3 tries before she finally says, well, I don't want her to do it. And at that point, the mother, the Hemlock board member, she gets a frown on her face, and I'm doing this back and forth because I don't have a 2-camera shoot here. I'm having to look at both faces because one's at the head and she's at the other. And I could tell, I said, you don't like it that your daughter just said that. And she gets this, again, that same kind of devilish smile. No, I don't. I said, but you know why she said it, don't you? And she kind of grudgingly says, yes. Why do you think she said it? Because she loves me. And I said, of course she does. And yet she loves you enough to respect a choice that she thinks is misguided. And the woman who wanted me to be extricated from the room is witnessing this whole thing. And at the end, after a day of this, she finally had an epiphany herself and realized this whole myth of so-called choice is not necessarily a choice. And it's very much like the choice at the end of life that Gail talked about. If you read people who've written about the perceptions of women choosing abortion, they don't choose abortion like you choose between chocolate and vanilla. They choose abortion like an animal caught in a trap feels like it has no other choice. And that's from Frederica Matthews Green, and a book was called Real Choices. And that's from the real lived experience of people in this. I think the end of life is analogous. Just like it's a privilege for me, like on Monday, to be there at a birth. We had a C-section. And I mentioned that the C-section rate's been too high in the country, and that was one of them. We didn't even try from an equally safe procedure, what's called a VBAC, or vaginal birth after C-section, TOLAC, trial of labor after cesarean. I'm not questioning the choice. Choice might have been good. It was a big baby. It was a 10.5-pound baby. But I'm just simply saying that we make choices, and some of the choices I think aren't that great. It's a privilege to be at her birth and be a part of their birth experience. And it was equally, if not a greater experience, to be part of somebody who lets you be there at the time of their death. They're passing naturally into another, from a Christian point of view, the hereafter, eternal life. And that's a privilege. And to negate that, when Marlene and I were on a show with Dobson's successor, Jim Daly, at Focus on the Family just last week. And, this whole came up about what about a death with dignity, so-called death with dignity. So, they've co-opted the term dignity. Because, you think about it, and it came to my mind, that one of the most, if not the most dignified death in the world was the death of Jesus Christ on the crucifix. Because he died, he laid down his own life for the very people who were persecuting him. So yes, he was tortured, he was scourged, he had horrible suffering. But the word dignity absolutely applies. And so we've allowed the death movement to co-opt these words. Choice, reproductive choice in dying, death with, they're all so-called. I was talking with David at the beginning of the session, and he talked to me about, because he's fought in these battles as well, about so-called death with dignity. We always have to use the word so-called, because if you just carry the language that they've labeled a bill and don't use the word so-called, you don't call attention that you're really carrying water for the devil, if you will. I mean, you've allowed the euphemisms to prevail. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So always say so-called death with dignity, the so-called Affordable Care Act. You follow me? Because it's not. And if you use those terms, you literally are saying you're agreeing, at least tacitly, behaviorally. And so, long-winded answer to that hopefully did some justice.
It is very, very good. Dr. Toffler, I believe we could just listen to you all the time. You have a lot of wisdom and a gracious way of saying it, imparting it to us. Liberty. I always get questions, what about rape? That is like the number one. It's like every single abortion is because of rape. And that's the implication. The other side, pro-abortion forces, have been extremely successful in portraying rape and abortion. They're one and the same thing, and there's no other reason for abortion. What do you say?
say a lot. But really quickly, before I get into that, I wanted to back up what Dr. Toffler was saying about the co-option of words. And I really wanted to encourage you guys to not say pro-choice. Don't ever say it. Say pro-abortion. And it irritates them up and down the wall. I did it at my most recent debate because somebody corrected me on it. And they say pro-abortion. It's not a choice. So I said it, and my family members were sitting in the audience, and they said that they heard the audience members saying, why does she keep saying pro-abortion? We're pro-choice. We're not pro-abortion. We're pro-choice. So by calling it what they actually are, you're basically holding a mirror to their faces and making them think about it. So don't say pro-choice, and help your friends not to say pro-choice. Don't let them use a positive word for something that's horrible. And as to rape, that's kind of similar, because what people are doing is they think that what they're doing is coming from a high moral standing point, because they're trying to help people that are in probably one of the most painful places that a woman could be in, is where she has been sexually violated. And so they make themselves look really good by saying, and I've even had people that were supposedly pro-life say, no, we should have this legal during rape and incest because it's horrible pain that a woman is going through. And can you even imagine, and sometimes they say, have you been raped? Do you know what that's like? It's just kind of an attack on me and deflecting from the argument in case somebody does that to you. But what they say is, it's horrible, and how dare you say that they have to endure 9 months carrying the product of that rape and being reminded daily that their rapist child or the person who committed incest with them, their child is inside of them. And then what you guys can say is you guys are really on the point of high moral standing, because I cannot tell you how many post-abortive testimony givers that I have had come to my talks. And there's been women, I'll tell you one story. There's a woman who came and she cried basically the entire time, which of course makes the audience just bawl because you can see real emotional pain. And she was 12 when she was raped, and she became pregnant following her rape, and she was forced to have an abortion by her parents. Then she was a victim of incest, became pregnant, and was forced to have an abortion following the incest. And what this woman said, who has had countless miscarriages since, she was in abusive relationships, she wanted to kill herself multiple times. She said that she was able to deal with the rape and the incest. There's therapy for that, there are programs, there are support groups for that. And of course there are for people who have abortions, but she said that she still always thinks every single day, she gets up and she doesn't think about a rapist. She gets up and she thinks, I have 2 children in heaven that are there because I got down on that table and let them kill me, kill those babies. And so what we have to think about is the long-term pain, not the short-term, the 9 months. I'm sure it's so hard. I can't even imagine dealing with a rape and then having to deal with that pregnancy. But there are so many options available to women, and we certainly as pro-lifers want to help those women to deal with that and then result in life for both, because one crime does not mean that there should be 2 crimes resulting in it. And women say that they feel like they went from a victim to become a perpetrator. And they've also said that abortion felt like being raped again because it is so invasive and intrusive, and you realize eventually at some point that you laid down and you let somebody kill your baby, regardless of who parent it was. And then last thing, nobody should ever be punished because of a decision that one of their parents made. It isn't just, we don't do it in the world today, and we should not do it on unborn children. Just because one of their parents is morally corrupt or did something horrible, they should not be punished because of what their parent did. Therefore, we should not punish an unborn child because of the way that it was conceived.
The question is, though, we have so many people in foster care, and some of those lives are miserable, and why should we continue that? And I would, when people on the other side make a fair point, I want to acknowledge that, that the point is true. There are some people in foster care that have very difficult situations. I'm the medical advisor for the Perry Center at Trillium Family Services, and I can tell you there are a lot of hard stories out there, so you're right. Now, on the other hand, I think there are people who accept that and have taken responsibility. In fact, I mentioned Jim Daly as an example. He's an orphan himself, who's the president of Focus on the Family, and he found out that there were 800 orphans in the state of Colorado, and there are 1,000 Christian churches in the state of Colorado. And he said, what's going on here? Why are there 800 orphans? So they started a Wait No More program that's now spread to several states, and we're trying to walk in this case, the Christian walk, to do what needs to be done to take care of orphans. And so in a matter of several years, they reduced the number of orphans in the state of Colorado from 800 to 300.
Some people say that that's not good enough.
And it isn't good enough.
Happily run away.
And it isn't good enough. And so Jim Daly and his wife just recently adopted 2 kids themselves. It needs to be better. So again, I want to go with the things, unlike them, where they'll never allow you cede any ground for the indefensible things they're trying to defend. I want to show the mushy middle independent people that, we are reasonable people, and there are important points to be made. Now, having said that, I never forget my wife who, when, responding to one of her siblings who indeed went too far with a relationship when he was, in his 20s, young 20s, and resulted in a pregnancy, and she was forced by her father, who didn't want his daughter to be marrying an Italian. My wife's thankfully 100% Italian, but some people think that's an inferior quality. I can tell you, with the food and cooking my wife's cooked for the last 38 years, it's not inferior at all, and you should try it. But he didn't have that wisdom, and indeed his daughter was threatened with all kinds of things, and yet that sibling of my wife, Marlene, is still a pro-choice, so like a Pelosi Catholic, if you will. And they were discussing this one time, and I remember vividly, I'll never forget this, is that he says, you want to, just exactly what Liberty was talking about, you want to go through that, put her through that. She got raped with different situations. It's happened twice now in the sense of pregnancy is not planned. And she got raped, and you want her to go through a rape, go through another event where she'd have to carry it to term, and she wouldn't forget that. And Marlene just simply asked a question and said, well, so she can forget the abortion now? And, well, no, I didn't say that, and yet, this is the kind of double mentality, as though, carrying the baby to term is a horrible thing. The truth is this, very much like one of my patients who was told, he's a schizophrenic and had drug abuse problems and all kind of things. She was told she wasn't responsible enough to carry a baby to term. And she'd had 3 abortions. She comes to me with the 4th pregnancy, and I took a totally different tack. I can't predict whether you're going to be adequate or not. That's not something, we don't have any crystal ball courses in medical school. And I just supported her with her choice, and she carried the baby to term. And I can tell you her life turned around because of the choice to having to be responsible for that child. And the child's had a wonderful home, even though she's a single parent. Now, it's not all a fairy tale. She's gone on to have subsequent abortions after that. She stopped having me as a doctor, and other people obviously bought into the overwhelming circumstances and colluded with her desperation. So the point is, when we have foster children that need help, we need to correct that problem. The solution is not to kill them. That's true at the end of life, too. You're suffering at the end of life, so we kill the victim? No, the solution is to give good pain relief, give companionship, do what Mother Teresa did with the dying. It's hopeless, but no one should die alone, and we should come and be around. So they make a good point. You've got to also put your arm around it and love that very people are making these kind of crazy points, even if they don't make sense. So
I want to say one thing really quick too. Just to augment that too, I think that every single person in this room could talk about some horrific experience that they've had in their life. So just because people have difficult lives doesn't mean they shouldn't have that life at all. And I do have friends, and some of my friends, they were grandparents, and they lost their grandchildren to the foster care system because of their kids. And that's so hard for them to imagine them being in the foster care system, but we as Christians believe that Christ loves those children more, and He is watching out for them. And at some point, those children will be able to choose for Christ. And many children come out of the foster care system and have amazing lives after that. You can get over the bad childhood. But if you never have a childhood at all because you were aborted, that isn't fair, and nobody should have that choice taken away from them.
People make a lot of presumptions that if such and such is born or not born, that this is going to happen. Well, I guess your question would be to say, now, how do you know that? How do you know that's going to be so? The question is, or the fact is that girls say all the time, I would rather abort the child than adopt it. That's just a fact. We couldn't get up for adoption, and so they choose abortion. And when I used to do a lot of speaking, that I heard that come from their very lips. Oh, I could never adopt my child out. and they just would choose abortion. There's been studies done on this, and this actually is where we came from with the philosophy of stand-up girl. The studies done on this is that girls, or there is a perception out there by society or by girls that are saying this, is that bad women give their babies away. Bad women give up their babies, give them away, such as being adopted. Good mothers keep their babies. This is the mentality. You don't give away your baby. That's usually what they say. I could never give away my baby. Well, bad mothers give away their babies. Good mothers take care of their babies and raise them. And this is the mentality they're thinking. And along with that goes the idea, when they're pregnant, whether they admit it or not, and most of them know that there is a life there, and so they see before them the death of their life, their plans, their visions. They're going to go to school, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. And if they have this baby, this is their thinking, because it's not right, but it's what they think. If I have this baby, my life is over. My life is dead. So I have a choice. Either I kill my life or I kill my baby. And I can have a life. So that's whether they voice it or whether they know it, that's what's going on in their mind. And out of that understanding, out of that survey that was done in the early 90s, we developed Stand Up Girl. And the pro-life community is embracing this whole idea, is that brave women who you can give hope and give courage to bear their babies. And that is actually the point of Stand Up Girl. I think most of you know that, is that the mission statement is to give hope and courage to women facing an unplanned pregnancy. That it's a courageous thing to have their baby. And you give them the hope that their plans aren't dead. Their plans are not dead. Women all through centuries have been able to have babies and have careers. And actually the reality, although they don't realize it right now, your hopes for the future change once you have a baby. Usually, all of a sudden you want to take care of the baby. And whatever you thought you wanted to do, sometimes you still don't want to do. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Of course, you don't want to burden them all at that point. But it's thoroughly possible to have a baby. In fact, Stand Up Girl is filled with letters. What happens when they finally decide to have this baby is all of a sudden they have a reason to live. We've seen this time after time. Oh, here, in fact, this happened to my daughter. I want to live a better life. I don't want to keep living this life. This life isn't a good place to raise my child. And so she literally changed lifestyles. Girls change lifestyles. They now have a child to, sometimes unfortunately it's just them, the dad isn't around, but they have a child to live for, to provide for, to finish that degree for, to get that job for, to do that career for. We see this over and over and over in Stand Up Girl letters and in life in general. So you need to get them over that hump and give them hope that indeed their life, knowing in fact, they're thinking their life is over. That's exactly, whether they say it or not, that's what they think. My life is over as I know it if I have this baby. So we need to give them hope and courage. A lot of times referring to other, in our site, we have lots of examples of girls that were in the exact same situation that had their baby. So that's the thought process. The girl is thinking, my life is over. And only bad moms give away their baby. So my only choice is to kill my baby.
They triggered a thought. I mean, one, I have a question for you. Did you ever use Stand Up Girl as a resource?
At that time, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Was that a yes or no? What was?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
It was in California.
Okay. So it was, yeah.
This
So.
was years ago.
So it's a great idea that Gail has. The other thing, I want to just give some of the medical facts that have been published, but that many people don't know. Because a lot of times you hear that abortion is safe, legal, and let's make it rare for some reason. If it's so safe, legal, and it's great, why make it rare? It should be spread. But by the way, it wasn't me that came up with that. It was one of Clinton's advisors that said, you got to stop saying this because it doesn't make any sense. He was the editor of U.S. News and World Report, I think, is Morton Zuckerman or whatever. Anyway, the bottom line is that if you look at the data on women who choose abortion, it's supposed to be safe, legal, and rare. So there's a study done in Finland, and there's only 4 things that can happen to a woman in the childbearing years. And so they have a population that's totally captured by computer because it's all, socialized medicine. So it's a very easy study to do. You can see, they can either not be pregnant, they can become pregnant, have a miscarriage, they can become pregnant and have an abortion, or they can become pregnant and carry it to term. So you know exactly what happens. Now, it's the big M of M and M, M, mortality and morbidity. And if you follow these women over only 1 year, who's alive at 1 year? That's the outcome of the study. So it's very easy to do. Are you dead or alive? Not subjective. So you would expect that, if you say, well, not being pregnant will make that the control group, and that's a relative risk of 1. So if you have a relative risk of 2, that means you're twice as likely to be dead. If you have a relative risk of 0.5, you're half as likely to be dead. So we know that pregnancy is a dangerous thing, right? Bleeding and C-sections and all that sort of thing. So what would you expect the relative risk of a person in preeclampsia, seizures, all these bad things, hypertension, So what's the relative risk of the woman who becomes pregnant and carries it to term relative to somebody who doesn't become pregnant at all? What would you guess? It should be more than, right? Because pregnancy is so risky, that's what you've all been told. Well, it turns out the likelihood of being dead is half of what it is if you never became pregnant at all. It's all-cause mortality, half, 0.5. Now, miscarriage is a loss, and you'd expect, well, some of those going to have D&Cs and procedures done to them, things like that, have to take drugs, whatever. That'd be risky. Well, their relative risk of death in 1 year is 0.9. So it's still less than not getting pregnant at all. Now, this may be, when you're pregnant, maybe you don't get up on ladders and paint the roof, do the roof, or maybe you don't hang glide. I don't know maybe you don't drink and drive. You certainly don't smoke as much, we know that. But the point is, what would it be carrying the baby to term, we said, miscarriage? So having abortion is so safe and it's legal and it's so widespread, over 1 million a year, millions and millions more worldwide. So what's the relative risk of being dead in 1 year? It's double. You're twice as likely to be dead in 1 year. And it's not the procedure itself. So what is it? You're 6 times more likely to be suicidal. So much so that in England there was a famous case of an artist in her 30s, young 30s. She had twins. She decided to abort her twin pregnancy. It made international news. And a month later, she killed herself. In her suicide note, she said, "I wanted to be with my twins." And it caused the legislature, British Parliament, to actually pass a law saying that you should screen for depression prior to doing abortions, and because it's a higher risk. And they actually, British College of OBGYN actually agree with that, unlike the American College of OBGYN that seem to have their head somewhere else in the sand. And so I just want to keep it clean. And so they just aren't thinking about the science. And if you think about the science, then the whole ideology of telling people that it's safer to end the pregnancy, with exactly what Gail said, with the studies, 95% of women who choose abortion regret their abortion and wish they'd made a different choice or felt they had no choice. That's what the data and focus groups say. There's multiple books about this kind of thing. Real Choices I mentioned. There's also the one that you had as a plenary speaker several years ago, Teresa Burke. And her book is called Forbidden Grief. Thank you. See, this is a very savvy audience here. So, and I really encourage you to read these books because they're the true stories, not the hypothetical what ifs. And if you read these true stories and you care about women, then you would be making different laws about openness, transparency about what's going on, real choices for women. And interestingly, Frederica Matthews-Green was a feminist, pro-choice woman. All she did was be a true liberal and listen to women, and converted her heart. She's now a pro-life feminist, and very powerful woman, a speaker for this cause, just as powerful as liberty.
Oh, thank you. Can I say something really quick, Gail? Okay. I have a really good hint for you guys. I learned this because I was preparing for my debate, and Scott Klusendorf, he's come and spoken here, right? Okay. Go to his website and read about it and watch his videos. Scott Klusendorf. He is amazing. He really prepared me for my debate because it was my first one. So this is what he said. This is what you guys can go do almost immediately as soon as you talk to a pro-abortion person, because they're going to say this. Abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, like he said, right? This is what you say. Why should it be rare? If it doesn't kill a human being, why should it be rare? If it's safe and it's legal, then you should do it as much as you want unless it kills a human being. And then you can bring it back to the core of our argument that human beings, born and unborn, should all be protected. And then you can argue about personhood and how the unborn baby, use the SLED test. We don't have time to go over it, but you guys look up the SLED test, S-L-E-D, SLED test. Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Those are the 4 things that they say an unborn baby is not human because they're smaller, they have a greater degree of dependency, they're in a different environment from us, and their level of development. So, get them to go to personhood. Get them to talk about the unborn baby as a human being. Because you can argue all day long about abortion being safe, legal, and rare, but if it's not a human being, then what are we doing here anyway? Let them abort the babies as much as they want. But if it's a human being, then they should not be saying safe, legal, and rare. There should be no abortions. Do you guys get it? Okay. Scott Klusendorf. I think it's like prolifetraining.com or something like that. It's something very...
In Google's name.
Yeah, Google Scott Klusendorf. Klusendorf. And if you go on YouTube, there's tons of videos. He's so good and really interesting, just like Mr. Toffler, Dr. Toffler. We're going to pass back compliments.
That's wonderful. We are coming to a close, but I like the reminder by Liberty. People, generally speaking, want, whether deliberately or innocently, like to argue about the peripherals. And you can spend your whole entire time arguing about the peripherals. Bring them back. If this is a baby, we shouldn't shoot them if they are poor, if their mother's been raped, where they live, or for any reason, if in fact this is a human being. And so that's the real argument. Is this a human being or is it not? And if it is, then we need to protect them. And if it isn't, doesn't matter if we abort them. That's the real argument. We are out of time. It goes quickly when you have wonderful speakers and wonderful information. I thank you very much. And so we will end the seminar. And you got one more, and then we've got a super, super duper closing speaker. Thank you.